Welcome to the Soft Life with SADDIE Baddies. SADDIE Baddies is the antidote to mental health stigma, and this podcast is hosted by yours truly, Priscilla O. Agyeman. We are a virtual sanctuary centering Black and multiracial people, and we prioritize the mental and emotional nourishment that is the foundation of collective healing in our communities. Thank you for being here. Welcome back to the Soft Life Podcast, Baddies. I'm your host, Priscilla O. Agyeman, and we are back with another episode this week. I hope that so far your June has been off to a great start. It is Gemini season. We just had a full moon in Gemini this past week. So I really hope that you took time to set some intentions for this new moon. It's really, really powerful. It's all about activation and really kind of picking up where we started, maybe in the beginning of the year. I've definitely been feeling that energy on a personal level. I've been picking up a lot of the projects that I started and kind of left by the wayside in the beginning of 2024. So it feels good to be revisiting it and really be active about pursuing that creativity as well as just the other projects that you want to see into fruition this year. So I hope that you've had time to set some intentions for this new season. And last week we talked about the subtle art of not giving a fuck. And that episode was all about letting go of your fear of perception and being perceived. That was a really good episode, especially if you're someone who feels like social media is starting to feel like this weird playground, this weird kind of social playground where everyone's just staring at you, but not interacting and engaging with you. So I shared some tips and as well as strategies to how to get over that and overcome that and just show up authentically without having to sacrifice your privacy or your peace of mind. So definitely check that out. We've been mixing up our solo episodes along with guest episodes. So let us know if you like this format of kind of mixing it up. We do have a couple more guest episodes planned for this season, so stay tuned for that. And I really encourage you, if you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go over there and subscribe. It takes 0.5 seconds. The link will be in the show notes as always, but this really is our goal for this year, is to grow our YouTube channel. I really would love to see the SADDIE Baddies that we have on all different platforms, especially Instagram and TikTok and even Threads and Twitter and our Geneva home. I would love to see y'all come and join us on YouTube, because that is going to be probably one of our main places where we show up. And I would love to have those in-depth conversations with you. We'll mix it up and have both short form and long form content. We already do have all of the podcast episodes. So if you're somebody that likes to watch videos throughout your morning or maybe at your desk at work, you have your headphones on and you're watching your favorite YouTubers, this is a great way to add us into your routine. I know a lot of you already do this, which is just so great. It makes me so happy seeing how we are a part of your routine. But if you're anything like me, you really enjoy watching your podcasts as well as listening to them and having that option if you are on the go. So definitely join us on YouTube. It's super, super fun over there and would love to have you, of course. So if you could also leave us a rating and review. We are definitely, on our way to just having this be a really, really great season. And I'm really proud of the work that we've already put in. Of course, from our producers, Dos Catorce, really excited to continue sharing new episodes and more content with you all. So again, stay tuned, more on the way, but let's get into this week's episode. So this week's episode is all about decentering work, quiet quitting, and bouncing back after being laid off. So I really wanted to talk about why quiet quitting is this phenomenon and what I actually think is causing the quiet quitting. Believe it or not, there's a lot of research about quiet quitting, and we'll get into what quiet quitting really is. But there's a lot of research, especially since 2020, where we saw mass layoffs nationally. There has been this trend of quiet quitting kind of on the tail end of 2020 and the beginning of the pandemic. All the way 4 years later, we're still hearing that term kind of being spread loosely. And so I really want to talk about what quiet quitting truly is and how to tell if you are quiet quitting and why sometimes quiet quitting is not all that bad. And of course, I want to go into, decentering work in a way that will allow you space to explore other passions that you might have while still getting your check, getting to the bag. And of course, I want to talk about my own experience being laid off. Unfortunately, a lot of us have experienced layoffs, and you might know somebody, one of your friends or somebody in your circle, your family has been laid off. Unfortunately, with the way our economy is, it's really important to have the tools to be able to have a support system that you can create if that does happen, or if that happens to someone you know. And, me just going through it firsthand, I know how to deal with layoffs. So definitely want to give you some insight onto that. So let's get into today's topic. So what is quiet quitting? Quiet quitting is a term that is used to describe a situation where employees perform only the bare minimum required to do the task of their job and not engage in any extra duties or responsibilities beyond exactly what is stated in their job description. So, according to Google, quiet quitting says that this behavior reflects a mindset of fulfilling job requirements without going above and beyond. And it's often as a response to burnout, dissatisfaction, or a desire to maintain a better work-life balance. So I find that very interesting. Quiet quitting is not necessarily all negative, but it's not completely perceived as all positive. If you can kind of read through the connotation of quiet quitting, the whole gist of it is that quiet quitting is doing just enough to get by, in a nutshell. So what are the aspects of quiet quitting? According to research, there are 5 main aspects of quiet quitting, and this might differ from you just showing up at work and doing what you need to do. Quiet quitting is embodied in these 3 characteristics. So the first one is minimal engagement. The second is strict boundaries. The third is focus on job description. The fourth is reduced enthusiasm. And the fifth is work-life balance. So let's start from the top. Minimal engagement. So this means that employees do not volunteer for additional projects, attend optional meetings, or take on extra responsibilities. So that means you are not doing nothing extra. If there's a calendar invite that pops up that you are not in part of the project or the meeting or the task, you're like, I'm not going, decline. That means that if there are extra projects on your team, or say your manager or supervisor wants you to do something additional, or even possibly do things that require, another level of skill set that you haven't exercised yet, you're like, nope, not for me. I don't feel ready for this, right? So that is kind of what the minimal engagement aspect is. Next, we have strict boundaries. So this is probably the biggest definer of quiet quitting, is having strict boundaries. So they say that when someone who is quiet quitting has very strict boundaries, they adhere strictly to the work hours and do not work overtime unless compensated. So this means when you clock out, you clock out. This means that when it's Friday and it's 5 p.m., even 5:01, you're not answering any emails. You're not answering any texts from your manager, your team, nothing. Nobody sees you until 9 a.m. on Monday. This is designed to have people have very, very specific hours of operation, and they do not allow anything outside of that window to be infiltrated. Basically, you're hard to reach if it's anything outside of that window. So strict boundaries obviously is one of the biggest indicators of quiet quitting. When honestly, I feel like, is it quiet quitting, or is it just adhering to your work hours? So questions that need answers. Next is focusing solely on the job descriptions. So this means that the employee believes that their efforts are confined to tasks that are clearly outlined in their job description. So this kind of goes hand in hand with minimal engagement, but this is more so objective to just your job description. So say you get hired to do a role like a marketing manager or a sales associate, and you have a very specific list of tasks that you do on a regular basis. It might be redundant. It might switch up now and then, but overall you're doing kind of the baseline same things of the job. Maybe you're writing reports or sending out emails or doing coordination, whatever the case is, but you're really just focused on that. That means that, again, if you are approached with a new opportunity, or if you're approached to do something extra, or maybe even help out a team member who needs additional support, you are probably the last person that is being asked to do this, because your manager or whoever's going to be like, they're probably going to say no, or they're going to be like, I don't think I can do that. So that is focus on the job description. Next, we have reduced enthusiasm. So that means that there might be a noticeable lack of enthusiasm or motivation beyond what is necessary to meet basic job requirements. So this means that you are not going to happy hours with your coworkers. You're probably not texting your manager about weekend plans. And, maybe you don't engage in the small talk or just share a lot about your personal life. And personally, I think that this is kind of a fine line. I don't think you should necessarily be completely disengaged with your team, because that can definitely end up biting you in the ass, especially if you work in a corporate environment or you work, in a startup. I've worked at a startup before, and it's very, very tight knit. It's very much giving like, we're a family kind of vibe, even though they're not your family. But they have this kind of culture of everybody like knows each other. Everybody's kind of, buddy buddy. So if you're someone who's like really not trying to do that, you could be perceived as not having enthusiasm, or in corporate lingo, not being a quote unquote team player. And then lastly, we have a work-life balance. So someone who really prioritizes work-life balance might feel like there is a significant motivation that is often to prioritize personal life and well-being over career advancement. So this means you're taking your paid time off, you're taking your sick days, your vacation days, you are utilizing the company's benefits packages, you are saying no to, again, anything that is additional from your workload. You are probably also saying no to personal meetings that do not have to do with your job. So say a coworker invites you to their bachelorette or their birthday party, you're probably going to be like, well, because this is a coworker and I'm not trying to extend or deepen that relationship, I'm going to say no. Literally, that's kind of the gist of quiet quitting. It's literally just focusing on your job, doing the bare minimum, and not doing anything else beyond that. Not trying to exceed and go above and beyond. Maybe you're not going to get employee of the month, or you're not going to get MVP. But so if this sounds like you, or this sounds like, this is literally what I do at work, you might be quiet quitting, or you might just have a very laid back approach to how you are pursuing your trajectory career wise, especially if you're in a corporate setting. And this episode is really for anyone who resonates with the term quiet quitting, but it is especially for my corporate baddies, because I think you understand how sometimes it feels like you're in this game. Very much so. It feels like you have to perform. So you will probably resonate with this deeply. So why do people quiet quit? I think that there are several reasons, namely about 6 reasons why people quiet quit. And I think the first thing starts off, obviously, with us being in a capitalist society. We have seen and we have proof that hard work is not always rewarded. And hard work, sometimes, especially in an environment in our offices or in our corporate environments, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're going to get a promotion, or we're going to get a raise or a bonus, or get the type of job that we want after putting all, this blood, sweat, and tears. I've also realized that sometimes when you have a job that you're working really, really hard at, and I'm saying like working on the weekends or, overtime, a lot of times that does not necessarily warrant that you're going to receive the fruits of your labor. I would say even early on in my career, the jobs that I had early on in my career, I was putting in an enormous amount of effort, an enormous amount of overtime, travel, commuting. It was just a lot more laborious. And those were the jobs that paid me the least. And I definitely think as a society, we have shifted completely from just thinking that hard work equals high reward. Sometimes we have seen people do the bare minimum and get rewarded, or we have seen our hard work not be paid off and compensated or rewarded. So that's number one. Number two is obviously having disengaged or hyper vigilant managers. When you have a manager who's very disengaged, it's like, if you're not going to meet me halfway, why would I meet you halfway, right? If you're my manager, my supervisor, why would I care if you aren't showing up for me? Or the reverse, when you have a hyper vigilant manager and you feel like the manager is not giving you the space to grow, they don't trust you, or they're being micromanagers, it's very hard to grow under that spotlight and under those circumstances. Next, obviously, is money, compensation. And sometimes your compensation or your salary doesn't equate to the amount of effort that you provide for a company, whether that be high or low, like I just mentioned. So sometimes your baseline effort becomes lower than expected because you're not being compensated accordingly. Next, minimal upward mobility. So again, this means that just because you are working hard or you have a job doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be moving up in the company, that you're getting your promotion every 1 to 2 years, that you're getting a title change, that you're getting a salary increase, or your benefits package has gotten more robust. Doing all of this work doesn't necessarily guarantee that. There's people who literally cannot even afford health insurance and they work a 9 to 5, they have a full-time job, and it's not creating more space for them to have an easier or a softer life. And of course, people are jaded after dealing with mass layoffs, especially in the early stages of COVID-19. COVID completely changed the way that we respond and act at work. It completely changed the way that we treat our jobs and our companies and the loyalty we have to our companies. So yeah, quiet quitting is a result of that, but it's also a direct response to burnout. And people are tired. They're tired of working jobs that do not pay them enough money to take care of themselves, to be able to save up, to have long-term goals if they want to, buy property or start a family or pursue higher education. They need jobs and salaries that can reflect that. So how can you criticize someone who is quiet quitting when they're just trying their best? They're literally just trying their best every single day, and it's not enough. So I think that these are some of the main reasons why people actually do quiet quit. Next, I want to talk about how I bounced back after being laid off. So I have shared this episode before. Actually, this was the episode of being in a liminal space. We shared this in season 3 of the podcast, but I shared, my whole journey of being laid off. But for those of you who have not heard or are unfamiliar, I was laid off in 2022. And I, at the time, was working at a tech startup, and a very small company. They ended up laying off literally a quarter of the entire company, about 26% of the company. And I was unfortunately one of the people that was affected by this layoff. And it really started off completely on a whim. I did have some insight as to maybe there could be layoffs. They did kind of hint that they weren't meeting the revenue goals that they had towards the beginning of Q2 of the year. And so I was like, well, that could mean one of two things. They're either going to do budget cuts or they're going to just completely do layoffs, right? So that actually ended up happening. I got an email one day at 6 a.m. I was actually on my way to going to work, and I wasn't on my way, but I was getting ready. So I was in the bathroom. Of course, it's 6 a.m. I was typically leaving around 8 a.m. and I was commuting into the office at this time. So I woke up. It was 6 a.m. I decided to check my email. I usually don't check my email that early in the morning, but I decided to check my email while I was brushing my teeth, and my jaw dropped. I was like, what? I saw the email, said HR, and then my initials. I was like, oh shit. And I opened that email and boom, lo and behold, it said, your position is no longer needed at this company, da, 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 da. And I was like, what the fuck? So I was in complete shock. I genuinely was taken aback. But my first immediate feelings were, disappointment. I felt hurt, but there was a sense of relief in a way too, that I didn't have to keep, pushing and pushing and pushing myself at a job that I knew was not going to necessarily give me the reward that I was looking for. I had been there for over a year and a half. I asked for promotions multiple times. I was given kind of a long spiel about why I wasn't ready to be promoted, even though I had kind of already done an internal promotion, because my original job description, I was not even doing my original job description. I had been doing something completely different. So I was hired to do clinical research, but I actually ended up doing clinical marketing. So I led the marketing efforts and recruitment for this company. And I was just like, wow, like I'm not ready for promotion, but yet you're trusting me to lead the marketing budgets for this, for this campaign. It's kind of wild, right? So note to self, try not to take on huge projects without being promoted into the role, because you might end up doing 2 jobs and only getting paid for one. But anyway, I was like, what? I can't believe this. I was in shock. I will say I was hurt. I was like, what's happening? The thing that really sucked is that I found out at 6 a.m. and literally I only had 1 hour to process it before I had to get on the call with HR and the, people from the C-suite, from the executive team of this company, the CTO and everything. And I was like, okay, I was able to piece together some things during my interview that I wanted to say and really let them know. They, documented it and kind of, I guess, offboarded me and just was like, hey, best of luck. I was able to get severance, which is basically when your company continues paying you, even though they've done layoffs or they've let you go. So I was able to receive severance for a few weeks. So it allowed me to have a little bit of a cushion financially, which was, I'm like, that's the least you could do. I'm not even going to say like, oh, that was so amazing, or no, like that's what I expect. That's the least that they could do, honestly, for laying off 25% of the company so abruptly. So yeah, and I still had some medical coverage for those weeks, and I was unemployed for about 2 months. I started, slowly unraveling like what it meant to be laid off and be pushed out of a company, basically, that I had no idea I was going to be let go of. And a lot of it was me just reckoning with this identity. I had never really attached myself too much to the identity of working at this company, because again, it was a tech startup. It was new, it was innovative. So I didn't really have the opportunity to be like, oh, I work here, or I work at this company, and this is my whole life, and this is a day in the life of me working at this company. Like, I didn't really attach myself to anything about this company, but it still hurt because I had put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Literally, I had put a lot of effort into this role wholeheartedly, and it did suck to see that I wasn't going to see the reward that I felt like I deserved. But I had to let it go. It wasn't up to me to get the reward I wanted. The reward was me having my peace of mind. The reward was me being able to reset my nervous system, and the reward was me being able to start a new chapter and move on from being laid off. And what did I do? One of the first things I did, I reached out to my network on LinkedIn. I had already, started to boost my profile on LinkedIn. There's a lot of ways to do this. If you're curious, or if you're like, okay, how do I do that? Child, there are so many YouTube videos, there's TikToks that will show you in depth, like how to optimize your LinkedIn profile. So my LinkedIn was already kind of optimized. So I reached out on LinkedIn. I wrote a post sharing that I had been laid off, as did all the other people who had been laid off. They all kind of shared a similar message and sentiments about their shock, but also their hope that they would get a role that was more aligned for them. So I reached out to my network, obviously told my family, my friends. I actually ended up doing some freelance work at this time. I was working with brands that I loved. I, had some brand partnerships, And I was just kind of allowing myself to feel what it was like to not have to wake up in the morning and go commute and have this crazy packed day and be rushing and like, you know, eat dinner in 5 minutes. And it allowed me to just kind of do like a system reboot of myself, which I needed. So I did some freelance work. I really fell back into doing some more grounding practices. My goal was to really reset my nervous system. I realized how much I was running on autopilot and I was completely burnt out. And so I did a lot of grounding. So I spent a lot of time outside, taking walks in the park, solo dates, really focusing on breath work and letting go of the past. Actually, my fiance and I ended up going on vacation to Mexico during this time, literally a few weeks right after being laid off. We already had a trip planned. So we're like, well, we're still going. So we went to Mexico, we went to Tulum. It was beautiful. We had such a great time. And actually, I had reached out to family, friends, and people that were in my network and told them that I'd been laid off. And a family friend of mine actually shared a referral at her company and, told me, hey, my company's hiring. They have a referral program. So she referred me and I got the job. And I got the job while I was in Tulum. So it was even better because I was not expecting anything. I mean, I'd done like 2 rounds of interviews, but I was like, I don't really know what's going to happen. I was interviewing with a few other companies and boom. Yeah, it just kind of aligned. And I started as about 2 weeks after I got back from vacation. And, I have found that, reaching out to your network and asking people to help, you would be so surprised to know how many people actually want to help you and want to speak your name in rooms of opportunities. And I'm really grateful for the community that, in my support system that saw that I needed help and stepped up and was like, hey, I got you. I'm going to, connect you with a referral, or, hey, here's this job description or this job role that I think you'd be good for. And you won't know what's out there until you ask for help. So definitely don't be afraid to ask for help. There's nothing to be embarrassed of. If anything, I think the company should be embarrassed, but that's just, that's just my opinion. I just feel like we shouldn't be feeling shame about getting laid off when we're not in charge of that. It's not our doing. It's not our wrongdoing. So kind of letting go some of that shame. Like when I really thought about it, I was like, why do I feel a way about this? This means that a company did not have the budget, or they didn't meet their revenue goals, or there was a circumstance that caused them to have to lay off people instead of maybe the CEO taking a budget cut from their salary. And, being able to save the company money, they decided to actually just let people go, right? Like I shouldn't feel shame in that. That was not my decision making. So yeah, that just allowed me to feel a little bit, more present, more grateful that I had a support system and everything worked out, thankfully, at the end of the day. So when I was ready for my new opportunity, this new job that kind of basically came to me, I was ready mentally, I was ready physically and emotionally for it because I had done the work to be receptive to it. And so I think that's a big part of the bounce back of laying off, is using that time to truly reset your nervous system, to share what you've learned about working at whatever company did decide to do layoffs, and look at the pros and cons. I made a list actually of what I had liked about working at the company and what I disliked about working there. I made it very clear, and I made sure that the next role had more of the traits that I wanted versus the traits I didn't want in the next role that I had. And with the layoff that happened, because I was in biotech and I was in clinical research, I was able to completely pivot because I ended up essentially working in marketing and working at an advertising agency. And so I was able to still utilize my skill set that I had learned and picked up because I had been doing basically 2 jobs at this other company. I had the marketing skills so that I would be qualified for this role. And I was able to essentially give myself a promotion because with the previous role, I was able to bounce into a different industry and also have a higher title and salary compensation with the role that I ended up securing afterwards. So I definitely, think that it can be scary. Obviously, being laid off, you don't know what's going to happen, but I really just hoped for the best and tried my best to be strategic about what pivot I was going to take. So decentering work really allowed me to refocus my energy. And I think decentering work from our life, specifically work in the aspect of it draining you or not having any work-life balance, I think that work or your job title or your career being the center of your entire identity is a slippery slope. And yes, that's even if you're self-employed, because especially in corporate spaces, it's very risky because we could at any moment be disposable. We could have that title taken away. We could have that validation taken away. So your sense of self-worth and identity being tied up in a job role or position is kind of dangerous, especially if you don't have the foundation of who you are outside of work. So I think just being able to be careful about tying our identity into our jobs. It's totally fine to be really good at what you do and to love what you do, especially if you're doing what you love. If you're an artist, if you're someone who is a creative, or you're a writer, you're a teacher or doctor, or whatever you are that you've really, really poured your heart into, it's totally fine to be passionate about it. But I think also having things outside of work, outside of that title that can sustain you and make sure that your self-worth and who you are as a person is sustained is also a really healthy approach. And mainly because if our sense of self-worth is tied to our job title, and if that job title changes, or if we get laid off, or we're no longer doing that specific role, it can really cause some emotional and psychological distress when that's snatched away from us. It can be destabilizing. So just having that foundation of knowing who you are outside of a job title. So how do you decenter work? What does that even mean? So decentering work to me means creating a value system that is not dependent on your job title. And it's also a way to create an ecosystem that is sustainable. So that means that anything could happen to your job title, but you will still be you at the end of the day. And one way to do this is to reflect regularly on your personal goals and your values, and to ensure that they align with your broader life vision. So what is it that you want for your life long term? Maybe right now you work in finance, or you work in advertising, or you work in education, but your goal is to actually be a painter, or it's to work with children and volunteer at a hospital, or whatever it is. Creating personal values that align with what you are doing actionably. So sometimes that's not always the case, especially if you're just starting out. You're just starting out in school and you're not really able to get the types of experiences that you really want through your internships. That's understandable. But if you're further along in your career and you're just like, okay, I'm at a crossroads, see if you can start to implement ways that what you do with your time matches up with what you have in your personal values, your personal value system. So especially if one of your values is service or community, you want to make sure you're doing things like volunteering on a regular basis, or donating, or mutual aid, so that it aligns with your value system, if you can't control that in your workplace. So another thing is to have hobbies outside of work. I think hobbies are what keeps us going as human beings. I love having hobbies. I'm a hobbyist myself. I have a lot of hobbies. I love gardening. I love going to museums. I'm also I'm a painter. I'm an artist. I draw, I paint. I love graphic design. I love music. I was playing guitar at one point when I was a teenager. I took guitar lessons. I tried playing tennis. I tried archery. I've done a lot of random shit, and I think it's really fun. I love trying new things. And even if I'm not good at it, I still love to practice. Right now, I think one of my main hobbies is Pilates, as well as yoga. I'm not really great, I would say, at yoga because I'm not the most flexible person, but I just love that it's a challenge for me. And every time I do show up, I do get better. So I know obviously yoga is, is a spiritual practice as well, but for me, I'm more so focused on the active part of it and what it allows me to do and how it makes me feel in my body. I think one of my favorite, I call her the side quest queen, and her name is Dominique Webb, also known as Fairy Brand Mother. And on social media, she is a founder, CEO, and the CEO of Cult Farms. We actually interviewed her a few seasons ago. She's one of our favorite guest episodes, but Dom is a side quest queen. She has a lot of hobbies that she shares, and she actually just shared a list of really cool summer activities that you can try this summer, and it's very unique. Some of them are, things you can do solo, things you can do with friends. So I'll be sure to link Dom's list of summer ideas for you below, but that's a great way to get started. And also, I just think decentering work means when you introduce yourself to someone, maybe not leading with what you do for a living. And I know that sounds odd, like, oh, well, why would I not lead with that? I just feel like if you're not in a networking situation, if you're just in a casual situation or environment, you can lead with your name and maybe where you live, or you can, talk about where you've recently traveled or where you want to go, or a TV show you've watched, or music, or an album, or talk about the environment that you're in. But I feel like, especially in cities like New York and LA, it's very common for people to just immediately judge you and want to know what you do for a living versus getting to know the person you are. So if you have met me even more in a casual sense in real life, I'm someone that doesn't really talk about, my 9 to 5 that much, because I feel like my background and what I do in a corporate sense doesn't necessarily define who I am. Those are skills that I have. They're skills that I'm really good at and things that I'm an expert in. However, I don't think it defines who I am. So I think prioritizing, who you are as a person outside of work is a great way to decenter work. Obviously, prioritizing self-care and your mental health care by setting boundaries and taking your regular breaks, taking your PTO when you need to, definitely using your vacation days. I can't tell you how many people do not use their vacation days because they feel like they don't deserve it, which is, not true. Use your vacation days, and also invest in personal development through learning new skills unrelated to your job. So, maybe you are working in a very specific role, but you want to learn new skills. So take on classes or skills. You can learn a lot of classes on LinkedIn. They have LinkedIn Learning. Google also has certificates where you can learn a lot of new skills, a lot of new different practices that will actually enhance you, but will also just give you a really great resume and background. So Google, LinkedIn, you can also just search things on YouTube just to get your feet wet, and then maybe invest in actually a course. But public speaking is a great way, a great space to start learning a new language, or creative writing, even cooking, or any other activity that really ignites your passion, your curiosity, and your creativity. That is ways to have more of like a well-rounded, kind of interesting profile as a person. And I guarantee when you're just the person who is not constantly talking about work 24/7, is not just like talking about your manager and your coworkers, but you have actually things, to say outside of that, it will just make you a more interesting person in general. And it will make your life feel less predictable. So definitely encourage you to, step outside of your comfort zone. I'm going to share some more resources in the show notes, so definitely check out the show notes. We have Sanea of Flynanced.com. She has a newsletter that she sends out for every single week with new job opportunities. She gives a lot of advice and tips. I signed up for her newsletter when actually I had been laid off 2 years ago, and some of her tips really helped me. So definitely check that out, as well as Kat Gabriel on LinkedIn. She shares funding opportunities and grants, especially for Black women and for queer, non-binary folks and founders. So check her out on LinkedIn. And of course, we have our own guide on Instagram about work-life balance. So we have topics such as being Black at work, or perfectionism, or imposter syndrome, and, a lot of other topics related to showing up and balancing that work-life balance. And we have related episodes as well about toxic jobs, how Black women deal with anxiety with Dr. Alicia Hodge, and getting back on track and finding your ikigai and just rediscovering your why. So check out all of the episodes and the links in the show notes and be sure to check them out. I hope this episode helps you to reframe your relationship with work. And yeah, stay soft, baddies. We'll see you next week. To stay connected, join SADDIE Baddies on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and more, and sign up for our monthly newsletter on saddiebaddies.com to stay in the loop. Sending you hella love, and stay soft, baddie.